The show goes on as it's day 4 of the Global Chess League taking place in Dubai, and we are going to have a look at an amazing game played by the 53 years old 5-time world champion Vishy Anand, playing with the white pieces against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, the Frenchman with 3 names, top player. And let's see what's happening in this game. Definitely, I'm pretty sure that you're going to enjoy this game with a lot of tactics when, as I said in the previous video, game between Sindarov and Nihal Sarin, when you put 2 tactically gifted players against each other, you get some amazing tactics to be seen. With the white pieces, Vishy opens the game with the move 1e4. And now, after the move e5, knight f3, knight f6, we have the Petrov defense. Knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes e4, black regains the pawn. And now you may think, once again, this boring type of symmetrical pawn structure with only one open file. Maybe you have some nightmares from having seen the Berlin game, where this also can happen quite often. But don't worry, we will get to see some spectacular chess. So that's what you get here on the channel. And instead of playing the main continuation d2, d4, which was actually played by Vishy yesterday in his game against Nepo, this is the main move, placing the pawn in the center. But instead, this time, Vishy goes for the move bishop d3, which develops the bishop, hitting the knight, and you're preparing to castle kingside very quickly. On the other hand, you should understand that placing the bishop in front of your d-pawn slows down the development of your pieces on the queen side. Black has numerous options. Dropping back with a knight to f6 is one idea, but a more principled continuation is the move d5, supporting the knight on e4. White is going to castle, and after bishop e7, white goes rook e1, attacking the bishop now together with the rook. So white is about to win a pawn if black doesn't do anything about it. So a very logical response would be to drop back with a knight. You can go back once again to f6, even d6 now is an interesting square to go to. But MVL has a different opinion, castles kingside. And that's a pawn sacrifice, but it's a conscious decision, not a blunder at all. Because after bishop takes e4, d takes e4, rook takes e4, black does get quite some nice play. And by playing the move c5, white goes knight c3, knight c6, black does get a grip in the center. Particularly the d4 square is under control. It will be very difficult for white to utilize its extra pawn. At least it's going to take a long time. And don't forget that black has obtained the pair of bishops. So especially the light squared bishop, also the dark squared bishop, they are potentially great pieces in an open position, able to exert pressure against the white pieces. So white goes d3, preparing to get the bishop into the game. Black goes b6. Still, everything is going according to plan. White goes bishop f4. White is about to complete its development. And black goes bishop b7. This was the idea of black's previous move, to develop the bishop to the long diagonal. And you can see that if black were to play, he would jump in with a knight to d4, attacking the rook on e4 with massive threats on this diagonal. So white anticipates the threat, drops back with the rook to e1. And black plays the move knight d4 anyway. So black's idea is just to play as actively as possible, opening up the diagonal for the bishop. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. And to be honest, I'm not sure this was the most precise way of playing, but definitely it's a very interesting way of playing. The reason I have my doubts is that I think the pawn on d4 may potentially become a weakness. Whereas if we go back 2 moves, with the pawn still being on c5, I believe that the structure of black is much nicer. However, after knight d4, knight takes, c takes, of course you do get a tempo hitting the knight goes away to e4, and now a rook c8 is played. This is part of black's strategy. You do end up with an isolated pawn on d4. It will be difficult for white to attack the pawn, and in the meantime black is looking for play along the c-file against the backward pawn on c2. And up to this point, players were still following a game of 2 top players, Levon Aronian against Lennart Dominguez, in which the move knight d2 was played, but frankly I don't see any reason to drop back with the knight yet. And instead, Vishy's move f3 does make a lot of sense. At first, it may seem as it's a pawn move close to the king. Why would you play it? However, this diagonal is close, so there's no potential danger against the king. And most importantly, you're trying to block this bishop on b7, supporting the knight on e4. So very solid construction for white. Black goes queen d7, connecting the rooks. And white goes for the move queen d2. Another interesting move, by the way, is to play something like rook e2 to overprotect the pawn on c2 and be able to move the queen over to f1 followed by rook a e1. Sort of construction like this with the plan of placing the queen on f2 is a very nice solid position for white. But let's see what happened in the game after the move queen d2. Rook c6 played. Very ambitious idea. And who knows, maybe at some point there's a rook lift. The rook can come over to the king's side. But most likely at some point we will get to see the other rook coming over to the c file to intensify the pressure against the pawn on c2. Therefore white plays the move queen f2, ready to play rook e2 when the pawn is very well supported. And the queen also keeps an eye on the pawn on d4 in case black is going to move its queen away from the protection. But it's up to black now. Black needs to prove there is at least some sort of compensation and goes for the very ambitious move f7, f5, attacking the knight. Of course, the knight cannot come back to d2 because that hangs the pawn on c2. But the knight has some other options. And for instance, knight g5 looks very logical, but black will play the move h6. And now you see the rook on c6 is excellently placed as it does prevent the knight jumping into e6. The rook covers that square together with the queen. That means the knight would have to go away to h3, and now I'm not sure white would be happy with such a knight stranded at the side of the board. So for that reason instead, Vishy played here the move knight to g3. But frankly speaking, the knight itself, it's stable there. It's not potentially a target for any of the black pieces, as it seems, but it's not very active. It's not clear where the knight is going next. Black plays bishop h4. This is a remarkable move, but you're pinning the knight on g3, and also with the queen and rook there are some potential problems. If if white is careless here, plays a random move, there could follow g5, attacking the bishop. If the bishop goes away, then the f pawn can come to f4, and then white will lose material. So therefore, white decided to come back with the queen to d2, covering together with the bishop the g5 square. So g7, g5 is not possible, but it explains the next move, h6. Black is looking for ideas to reintroduce the threat of launching the g-pawn. Queen goes to b4. And this is a remarkable change of plans, but very understandable. What is the queen exactly doing here? I will show you that first of all, the pawn on c2, it's unprotected, but black cannot really take the pawn because of queen b3 check, and you're going to lose the rook. So pawn is poisoned, and of course black is not going to play it. But at the same time, if black will continue with the announced plan of g7, g5, then we see that the bishop is no longer guarding the e7 square. Black is attacking the bishop on f4, but the bishop doesn't have to move. Instead, white is going to infiltrate with its rook on the 7th rank, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, bishop is hanging. If you move the queen away, something like bishop e5 can be played, and black's position is totally falling apart now with rook g7 coming next. Massive attack for white. So therefore, we understand that with the queen on b4, we are preparing ideas based on rook e7 if black is going to play g7, g5. But it's not played in the game. Black went for the move rook c5, closing the diagonal of the queen. Now, still, we got to reckon with g5 followed by f4, and that explains the move rook e2. The rook is excellently placed, protecting the pawn, getting out of this pin, and preparing the other rook to come over. So black continues here with the move g5, hitting the bishop. The bishop goes to e5, attacking the pawn on d4, and black plays the move f4. Black is looking for its own chances, and things are heating up now. The knight is in trouble. If the knight would go to its ideal square in the center, knight e4, then the bishop is hanging. There is rook takes e5, and black is winning a piece. So that is definitely not possible. Where should the knight go to? Well, if you go back to either h1 or f1, this doesn't look much fun at all. While something like knight h5, with ideas to go knight f6, forking the queen and king, runs into the move g4. And once again, this bishop, which was out of play, is now back in business. It's covering the f6 square. And now we understand black's strategy. It's working out very well as we are intensifying the pressure against the pawn on f3, ready to recapture with the queen. And black has a devastating initiative. So therefore, white has a different plan. Played here the move bishop takes d4, ignoring the threat. The knight is hanging. The knight can be taken, as the rook on c5 is hanging as well. But black decided not to take it. However, I believe that after f takes g3, capturing that knight, there is bishop takes c5, b takes c5. I think this is a very difficult position to evaluate because it's very open. Both kings are potentially quite vulnerable, but for some reason, MVL didn't want to go for this line, but definitely this was the best practical chance. It's not clear whether the two bishops are stronger or inferior to the extra rook of white. I think MVL miscalculated here his own chances, and he fought to be clever. Rather than taking on g3, he played here the move a5 with the idea to, of course, you're attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, then the bishop on d4 is hanging. This was very clearly black's idea. But there is the move queen b3 check. This is of course not overlooked by MVL, as he played here the move bishop d5, attacking the queen one more time. The queen doesn't have that many great squares to go to, but white even plays here the move c4, keeping the momentum of attacking the bishop. Don't forget that the rook on c5 is also hanging. Everything is hanging in this position, but MVL thought, I can take her on c4, capturing a pawn and hitting the queen on b3 at the same time. With the point that if you take the bishop, there is queen takes d4 with check. Black will win a piece because after white solves the check, there is f takes g3. Now, I believe the following move must have been overlooked by black because rather than recapturing, white played here the remarkable move queen c3. The queen is relatively safe now and bishop is hanging, rook is hanging. If the bishop goes away, you can simply take with your bishop on c5. Therefore, black played here the move rook to d5. The rook is going away with the point that if you do take the bishop with your queen, pinning the rook on d5, there is b5 attacking the queen. The queen wants to maintain the pin. If you go queen b3, then you go a4. The queen got to go away and then you recapture on d4. And things, probably white is better, but things are not that simple yet. So instead of taking on c4, Fishy came up with a brilliant resource. Maybe give yourself a minute to figure out what you can do. Pause the video. In the meantime, you can of course subscribe to the channel as well. Don't forget to do that. And then you will see what Fishy played. As Fishy played here the move bishop f6, moving the bishop away from a vulnerable square, bringing it closer to the black king. Bishop on c4 is still hanging. And of course the main idea is to get the rook in to e7. Black went for f takes g3. Is a piece up at the moment, but rook e7 attacks the queen. Massive move. The queen got to go away, went to d6. So now together with the rook, it's attacking the bishop on f6. There is rook g7 check, king h8. And now look, we have a devastating discovered check. But you got to be careful. You cannot just move the rook somewhere because you got to reckon with queen takes f6 as a response. Therefore, rook f7 is the most precise move. You give a check with your bishop now. The rook protects the bishop still, so no time for black to capture the bishop. King has to go to g8, rook g7, king h8. And now the question is it going to be a repetition? Or is there a way to keep the game going? Bishop e7 would have been a very nice move, hitting both bishop and rook. Instead, rook f7 was played one more time, king g8, and only now the move bishop e7 was played. What an amazing move, attacking the queen, threatening to take on f8, but most importantly, the main idea is to get a queen to g7 with checkmate. Therefore, Black got to do something. Took the pawn on h2 with check. So you got to do something about the king first. King h1. King is safe behind its own, behind the black pawn on h2. And black is forced to give up material because of the numerous threats. The only move here is rook takes f7. But now it's bishop takes d6. Rook takes d6. And now excellent move. Queen takes c4. And we can do the material count. You see it's a queen versus a rook and a bishop. And now sometimes there are reasonable drawing chances. But in this case, I believe that the rook and the bishop, they are not particularly well coordinated. Black played here bishop to g3. Imagine if this bishop is able to maintain control over the pawn on h2. And then at some point the rooks, they can come over to an open file and enter on e1. That could mean it's checkmate. So White's main priority now is to get rid of this bishop. So he plays here the move queen g4. Excellent idea. Bishop goes away. And now g3. Attacking the bishop one more time. Bishop went back to e5. And now the rook comes into play. Queen and rook in the attack against an exposed black king. That is game over. Let's have a look. Bishop takes b2. Rook e6. Very nice technique. You're willing to trade off one pair of rooks, as the ensuing endgame is really bad. Basically all black's pawns are vulnerable and the passed pawn should eventually be decisive. So black is not interested in trading off the rooks. Played here rook takes d3, rook takes h6. First pawn is taken, as now pawn on g5 is hanging as well. Rook d takes f3, queen takes g5. And now, for instance, if the king goes away back to f8, don't give a check with rook on h8. That's not checkmate because of this annoying bishop is able to take the rook in the corner. Instead, you can play queen d8, king g7, and beautiful checkmating pattern with queen and rook. Instead, bishop g7 was played. Bishop blocks the check, and now rook takes b6, taking another pawn, ready to come over to b8. Black is unable to launch a counterattack with rook check because you take the pawn and you walk out of the checks. The white king is absolutely safe. So instead, rook f2 played, protecting the pawn, but there's no counterattack. Rook b8. If you block with the rook, there is rook takes, queen takes a5. Totally hopeless endgame. The a pawn is too strong. So black went for king h7. And look, it's totally game over. But a tricky bastard like MVL will find some final trick. Queen h4 check, king g6, queen e4, rook 7 to f5. Now you think this is an absolutely bizarre move. Why would you go for such a self-pin? The rook cannot move now because of the king on g6. And the first move I looked at here is g4. Just why not play g4, pick up the rook? But this is exactly what MVL had been hoping for. There is rook to f1, king takes h2, bishop e5. And the king cannot escape from the checks. If you go king h3, it's rook to f3. And if you go up the board, king h4, it's bishop f6. Check. g5 only move, and now rook 3, f4. And white is forced to give up the queen. This is the final trick black had been aiming for. Instead, if you go back with the king to g2, then you're unable to get out of the perpetual. So this would have ended in a draw. Let's go back to the critical moment. Instead of playing g4, top player like Vachier-Lagrave Anand is not going to fall for this one. Played here the move rook b6, and now it's just game over. There's nothing black can do. Either it's going to be checkmate or he will be forced to give up material. If you play bishop f6 now, it's the move g4. And the same line we just have seen is no longer possible because the bishop is pinned as well as the rook on f5. This is game over. Other option could be king f7, but then it's queen e6, king f8, rook b8 with checkmate. If the king goes up the board to g5 or even to h5, doesn't matter, there is the move queen h4 with checkmate as well. And at last, the final option is to drop back with the king to h7, but there is rook b5. The rook is in trouble. On the next move, g4 can be played. Now it's finally game over. Beautiful effort, beautiful performance by Vachier-Lagrave Anand, who is on fire. We have seen that he lost the game to Magnus Carlsen, but he played a fantastic game today. And of course also his first round win against Jan Christophe Duda shows that the Tiger from Madras is still tactically really fresh. I hope you really enjoyed this game. Thanks for watching, and we will be back tomorrow with another spectacular game from the Global Chess League. Bye bye.